Hello, this is Professor White. We are going to talk about multiplication property of equality to solve linear equations. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, I have a mouthful here. Multiplication property of equality. So, this is how it works. If you have A equals B, I can multiply both sides of this equality by a number. Or I can divide both sides of this equality by a number. So, let's pick a number D. I can multiply the left by D, right by D, and I don't change anything, and that's perfectly good. Or I can divide the left and the right by the same number, and that will still be good. So remember that. This is how it works. Let's say I have 2x equals 4 and the question is solved. That means I want to go and isolate x. Remember we talked about some numbers some time ago. What you can do is you can take, this is called the coefficient, the number in front of the variable. Variable is the letter. Okay, this one is the variable and this one is the coefficient. I take the multiplicative inverse of the coefficient. Multiplicative inverse means you just flip it over. So 2 means 2 over 1. You flip it over, multiplicative inverse is 1 over 2. So I can think about, here's my coefficient 2, which is 2 over 1. I multiply both sides because I can do that with the multiplication property by its reciprocal, which is the multiplicative inverse. And I don't change anything, but the beauty of it, the 2's will go and you'll isolate x. 4 times 1/2 is 2. Sometimes my students think of it that way. Rather than multiplying both sides by the multiplicative inverse, they think of it this way. 2 is multiplying x. All I have to do is then do the opposite, divide by 2. And if you think of it that way, that's also good. You still get 2. And you can always check, is this correct? 2 times 2, is that 4? Sure looks like it. Now let's look at this one. This is a little bit harder to think about, but it's the same thing. What is in front of x? That's its coefficient. This is how you write coefficient. Here's coefficient. So when you have a negative x, this is the coefficient because that's the number in front of x. Here's the coefficient. The coefficient is -1. And this one is the variable. Okay? So I'm throwing those words at you, is just make sure that you keep track of them. So in front of x, there is -1. So this is like this. How do I get rid of that -1? Just simply multiply by its reciprocal. Reciprocal of -1 is 1 over -1, which is -1. So you can multiply both sides by -1. Guess what? The double negative will go, and you'll end up with -4. So this negative, just think of it as just jumped over on the other side. Okay, let's put it a little bit more difficult. Let's say throw in a decimal. Okay, what's the coefficient of x? It's -0.3. So let's think of it kind of simply. This is multiplying. That means I'm going to divide. Guess what? These two will go. -6 divided by -3, -0.3. You don't have to do really jump to your calculator. You can do that, but multiply both top and bottom by 10. Look what you'll get. You'll get a 60, and you'll get a -3. And double negative will go. 60 divided by 3 is 20. So you don't have to jump to your calculator when you are doing those kind of simple problems. So let's look at this one. Does it bother that you have an x on the right? It shouldn't. But what is the coefficient of x? That's the number in front of x. Think of it this way. So it's as if there's a -1. So what did I do before? Multiply both sides by -1. Guess what? These two will go. Then you'll end up with x equals double negative, a positive. Okay? So pay attention to that. Okay, let's make it a little more difficult. These are the things that I see in my classroom. Sometimes, you have to pay attention to it. What's the coefficient of x? It looks like, you can think of it this way. 4 is dividing. That means I have to multiply both sides by 4 to get rid of it. You can think of it that way. That's a little easier. That implies x equals 8. Or you can think of it this way. I'll just write it here. What's in front of x when you have x over 4? What's the coefficient of x? Coefficient of x, believe it or not, is 1/4. Okay? Because 1/4 times x is x over 4. So from your fraction division, you know that. So this problem is equivalent to 1/4 x equals 2. Remember what you're allowed to do. You're allowed to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of the coefficient. Reciprocal means, flip it over. So I'm allowed to multiply both sides by 4 over 1 because that's the flipped over version of its coefficient. Guess what that does? 4's go. You'll end up with x equals 2 times 4 over 1, which is 8. Okay? Now, let's do this one. I'll do it 2 different ways. Let me move this up a little bit. Okay, what's the coefficient of x here? What's in front of x? It looks like a 3, but in front of x, it's 3/4. Think of it like that. 3/4 x. That's the coefficient of x equals -5. Now, what am I allowed to do? Multiply both sides by the flip version, reciprocal, and this is how you write reciprocal. Reciprocal of its coefficient. All right? So reciprocal of its coefficient. Here's the coefficient. Flip version of it is 4 over 3. Multiply both sides by that. The beauty of that, these 2 will go and these 2 will go. You'll end up with x equals -5 times 4. That's -20 over 3. And you can simplify or change it to mixed number if you want later on. Okay. How about I throw fractions on both sides? Okay, I know that these are the problem areas, so I just wrote them out for you. What's the coefficient of x? In this case, the coefficient of x is -2/5. What is its reciprocal? -5 over 2. Here we go. Multiply both sides by the flip version. And remember, if it is negative, you keep the negative. What that does is, here we go. They go double negative with positive. You end up with x equals double negative. That's a positive. 5 times 5, multiply across. Remember your fractions. 25 over 2 times 7, 14. Okay? So, you can also change it to a mixed number just for fun. How many 14s and 25s? 1. And 1 times 14, that's 14 to 25, so that is 11. So if you watch my fraction videos, you know how to do those. All right, so that's my last slide. That means that when you have a situation, you have a coefficient only and you have a number on the other side, you multiply both sides by the reciprocal of the coefficient, the number, the whole number in front of x, and you'll isolate x, and that way you'll solve a linear equation for x.